Of course, we are here with Wednesday visit with Dr. Kelly Victory. She will be coming in just about 10 minutes or so. In the meantime, I'll be introducing you to Dr. William Makis, a Canadian nuclear medicine physician with training in oncology and some work in radiation therapy, immunology. And he has been reporting on increases in cancer rates as well as sudden deaths. And we thought we would talk to him about his data and see what it is he's seeing. Dr. Kelly is very excited to talk to Dr. Makis, has lots of questions, and he is connecting some of what he's saying possibly with vaccine therapy. So we will get into this. And of course, we are out on Twitter Spaces. And as usual, I'll be monitoring the Restream chat and the Rumble rants. So we'll see you right after this.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for Christ's sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want to help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
And welcome, everybody. I'm already engaging with the Rumble Rant people and the Restream. I appreciate you all being here.
I'm over on Twitch.
Oh, you're over on Twitch. How interesting. You're not in your usual Rumble room.
They get all the remarks that you make for all the platforms, but they have their own little world there.
Oh, how interesting. Well, we appreciate them being here, and you're all welcome. And I do, again, try to watch the chats. If I can pick up on any sort of questions that I can bring into the conversation here, I'm happy to do so. So once again, let me bring you our guest. It is, as I said, Dr. William Makis. He is a Canadian physician, expertise in radiology, nuclear medicine. He is a University of Toronto scholar and the author of over 100 peer-reviewed medical publications. Please welcome Dr. William Makis. There we are. Dr. Makis, thank you so much for being here. I will just start with the obvious. What is it, what caught your attention and what have you been seeing? Sorry, 1 second. There we go. We had an audio problem for just a second. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for having me. I started tracking vaccine injuries in about November of 2021 when I had noticed that Canadian doctors had started dying in their sleep after taking their booster shots. I had actually started speaking up about the failure of COVID-19 vaccine boosters back in August of 2021. And that's when I had, seen that the boosters had failed in Israel. And, Israel was the first country that had rolled out COVID-19 booster shots. And then very shortly after, they were the #1 country in the world for COVID-19 infections. And so that's where it started for me. And I've been tracking vaccine injuries ever since.
So like many of us, you just thought, what's this? I wonder what this could be. Did you have trouble getting data? See, that's what the state I'm in right now. I don't know what's reliable data and what isn't reliable data because I see very, very mixed results. Some too rosy, some too dire. How did you go about collecting your information?
It's very hard to get good data. And that's the problem, especially here in Canada. For example, when I was tracking the sudden deaths of Canadian doctors, the first problem I ran into was people telling me, well, doctors, were dying before the rollout of the vaccines. They were dying before the pandemic. How do you know that they're dying at any rate, higher than before? And so I had to get a team of people together and actually spend hundreds of hours going over reports on medical associations of doctor deaths, obituaries, and so on. And we had tracked over 2,200 Canadian doctor deaths over a span of 4 years, from 2019 to 2022. And we were able to determine that, yes, in 2021, for example, the mortality of Canadian physicians was 37% higher compared to 2019. And in 2022, it was 53% higher compared to 2019. But that took hundreds and hundreds of hours of collecting that information. And that's very hard to do.
Yeah. which is so weird to me that the government, particularly governments with good data, I would imagine, like the Canadian healthcare system, like the UK healthcare system, isn't running to their computers to do data analysis. I just don't. That's one of the many oddities of this pandemic. That's one for me. But first question I would have: were there any characteristics that jumped out on these physicians? Were they older? Were they younger? Were they equally distributed across male, female, anything?
The first thing I had noticed was that there were doctors in their 40s and 50s that were dying in their sleep. And they were dying in their sleep shortly after the rollout of the first booster shot, within a week or two of the booster shot. And that was highly unusual. It's very rare for a healthy adult in their 40s and 50s to just die in their sleep. Extremely
Yeah.
rare. So that was the first red flag that I had seen. And then in 2022, in the summer of 2022, we actually had 3 doctors who had died within days of each other at the same hospital in Mississauga, Ontario. And they had died after the rollout of the second booster shot, within days of the rollout of the second booster shot. So again, you had another cluster of very unusual deaths. And then we had a lot of deaths of physicians who were engaging in exercise, doctors who were running. For example, 50-year-old Dr. Paul Hannum from Ontario, emergency doctor, who was actually an Olympic athlete and was out for a jog and collapsed and died on the spot. We had a 27-year-old Dr. Candice Naiman from Hamilton, Ontario, who was a triathlete, who actually collapsed during the swimming portion of a triathlon and died 4 days later in the ICU. So then you start seeing patterns of doctors dying while exercising. And again, that is extremely unusual. More men dying than women, I've noticed, but women dying also. And again, dying in their sleep, dying of cardiac arrests in their 40s, 50s. And then I had noticed an increased incidence of cancers, very aggressive cancers in young doctors in their 20s, 30s, 40s. And these cancers would kill them in a matter of 6 to 12 months. And usually these cancers arose after they had 2 shots or 3 shots and progressed extremely rapidly. And again, this is something I have simply not seen in my career.
And were there posts done on any of these guys? Anything that from the pathology departments that you were learning?
Unfortunately, it seems that autopsies are not being done in the vast majority of these cases. And I've heard from my physician colleagues that autopsies are being actively discouraged. And in some cases, when they are done, the results come back inconclusive, or the results take 6 to 12 months to come back. So there seems to be really a push by the health authorities to not conduct proper autopsies in these cases.
And of course, autopsies have been on the decline for really since the advent of the CT and the MRI. People feel like they know what's going on. They don't have to put the family through the post thing. But you would think with sudden unexplained deaths that there would be at least some, and particularly amongst physician colleagues, somebody would kind of push for that. That's odd. And Dr. Victory is very anxious to get in here and talk to you, so I'm going to bring her in as early as I possibly can. But I have one last question that I always push the people we speak to here as it pertains to this data that we're trying to sort through. Any way to sort out versus vaccine versus some post-COVID phenomenon versus some post-COVID plus vaccine phenomenon?
Well, exactly. And honestly, I've been calling for proper autopsies to be done on all of these cases so that we find out what is killing these physicians. I've written 3 letters to the Canadian Medical Association asking them to, call for a halt of COVID-19 vaccines in healthcare, vaccine mandates specifically, and to call for investigations. And, they have turned back and they said, this is disinformation. There is no evidence of any harm being done to doctors, and that they're going to ignore this completely.
Have you had any evidence, again, then we'll bring Dr. Victory in here, I've just got many questions as well, any thoughts or evidence that pulmonary emboli have played into this phenomenon, particularly of the sudden deaths at night and whatnot? I mean, obviously, when somebody's exercising and drops dead, you think more about myocarditis, you think more about cerebrovascular events. But I am I'm beginning to develop a sense that pulmonary emboli, I've seen lots of it with COVID. I've seen none of it post-COVID. And I'm starting to wonder if the vaccine may somehow be precipitating PE in some of these people.
I've heard about a few cases where pulmonary emboli may have been the cause of the sudden death. My impression from the limited information that I've had access to is that most of these are probably cases of myocarditis, and myocarditis leading to arrhythmias and sudden cardiac death. These are, again, early in the morning. These are occurring while these physicians were exercising. So probably most of these cases were myocarditis related.
And so I'm just to shine a little light on what Dr. Makis is saying. So exercise, I think people understand, is a time when the heart is stressed, rhythms can develop, you get cardiac events of various types. But there's also most people don't understand that there's a certain window during sleep in the early morning hours, also when we are prone to cardiac events of various types. So for various reasons about the physiology of sleep. So that's why that comes to mind. All right, let's take a little break here. And I know Dr. Kelly is very anxious to get her hands on you as well. I think I've exhausted my initial questions. Hopefully I've asked some of the things she was interested in hearing about as well. And we'll take a break and bring Dr. Kelly Victor in here. Springtime is here, and personally, I can get red and irritated skin during these months, especially when I travel. But now I have an extra layer of protection thanks to Genucel skincare. Genucel's ultra retinol, formulated with the most powerful retinol alternative, bakuchiol, and proprietary MDL technology, soothes irritation and visibly targets red, blotchy skin. And the under eye cream, of course, helps hide the bags and puffiness that you can get from travel and just lack of sleep generally. In fact, you might have witnessed the astonishing effects of Genucel Redness Repair Intensive during a recent unplanned moment of our show, repairing my skin within minutes right before your eyes. That is how fast these products work.
I know I'm a snob about the products I use on my face. Everybody knows it. Every time I go to the dermatologist's office, they're just rows and rows of different creams. Retinols, vitamin C cream, under eye cream, night creams.
Scrubs.
And then when I get to the counter, they're overpriced. All kinds of products that you can all find at Genucel.com. I've fallen in love with this product at a fraction of the price.
Visit Genucel.com/Drew today and check out the personalized packages from Susan and myself, bundled with our favorite Genucel serums. And remember to use the promo code DREW for an extra 10% off. All orders are upgraded to free shipping. Plus, if you order now, every subscribe and save package gets a free spring spa package with 3 of Genucel's best-selling spa products, ready to try in the comfort of your own home. One more time, that is Genucel.com/Drew, Genucel.com/Drew. Over the last few months, no doubt you've heard a lot about spike protein, certainly on this program. The reality is, once lockdowns are well behind us, we will likely still be dealing with the effects of COVID and potentially the COVID-19 vaccines. Therefore, the spike protein may prove to be an important part of our story. With that in mind, I want to introduce you to the Wellness Company's Spike Support Formula. Whether you've been vaccinated or not, spike protein may be something you have become concerned about. The good news is that there's some interesting research on how to potentially deal with it. Studies have suggested that nattokinase and dandelion root are showing some potential in protecting you and your family. Our friend Dr. Peter McCullough and the team at the Wellness Company have the only product on the market that contains both nattokinase and dandelion root. In addition to the nattokinase and the dandelion root, the Wellness Company's Spike Support Formula also includes natural antioxidant ingredients such as black sativa extract, green tea, and Iris sea moss, all thought to help boost immune health. Go to twc.health/Drew to order today. Use code DREW at checkout for 10% off today. Buy gold and get a free safe to store it in. You heard right. On qualifying purchases from Birch Gold Group now through March 31st, they will ship you a free safe directly to your door. Here's the deal. Fed keeps raising rates because it is the only tool they have to keep inflation under control. But it isn't working. You can't spend your way out of inflation. And you've seen the impact on the stock market. You've seen the impact on your savings. Hedge inflation by owning gold, whether physical gold and silver in your safe or through an IRA in precious metals where you can hold real gold and silver in tax-sheltered retirement accounts. Birch Gold has an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of satisfied customers. Visit birchgold.com/Drew for your free info kit on gold and to claim eligibility for your free home safe by March 31st on qualifying purchases. Again, visit birchgold.com/DREW. Some platforms have banned the discussion of controversial topics. This episode ends here. The rest of the show is available at drdrew.tv.
There's nothing in medicine that doesn't boil down to a risk-benefit calculation. It is the mandate of public health to consider the impact of any particular mitigation scheme on the entire population. This is uncharted territory, Drew.
And welcome, Dr. Victory, for more of our uncharted territory. Have at it.
Thank you. And thanks so much for being with us, Dr. Makis. Before I launch into all the questions I have for you, though, I have to say, I'm really happy that we are talking about nattokinase. Anyone who follows me or follows this show knows that I've been talking a lot about the next tier, the next phase of this pandemic, which is what we do to help people who not only had COVID, but as importantly or more importantly, have been vaccinated and are suffering from the constant production of these toxic spike proteins. And I would say that nattokinase, of all the things we've talked about or heard about, probably to me has the most promise. Nattokinase is an enzyme that is produced from fermented soybeans. It's eaten in large quantities by the Japanese in a food called natto, which is kind of a cheese-like tofu type substance. And it's very, very safe, but interestingly, it seems to have an affinity to break apart, to cleave some of these spike proteins. The spike protein, fortunately, has some vulnerabilities on it that allow itself to be attacked by nattokinase and broken into smaller pieces. And it looks like that may well do a lot to actually make those spike proteins less toxic, if you will, in addition to the fact that there are lots of other healthful impacts of nattokinase by itself. It's one of the reasons people believe the Japanese have such a low risk of cardiovascular disease, because it's got great impact on blood pressure, on cholesterol, lots of it's healthful on its own right. But the fact that it may actually end up being the thing that breaks apart these toxic spikes, I think is very hopeful. And I'm unaware of any significant downsides to taking it. So happy that we're talking about that.
Fair enough. Well done.
My little aside. Anyway, so Dr. Makis, I'm so happy that you are here. I started following you and was aware of you when you were reporting on these sudden deaths in Canadian physicians. And although you were focusing on the physician sudden and unexplained deaths, that certainly replicates what we're seeing in the non-physicians. We're seeing the same numbers of unexplained sudden deaths in athletes. And as you said, people dying at two different times, either while exercising or in the early morning sleep hours. And Dr. Peter McCullough, I'm sure you're aware, has pointed out that he believes it's related to these fluctuations that occur in cardiac, things like adrenaline, norepinephrine, those sorts of fluctuations that happen both when you exercise and you have a rapid heart rate and high blood pressure, higher blood pressure, as well as when you're first coming into the early morning hours and those diurnal rhythms start to increase hormone levels and different cardiac levels. What I'm interested in is what kind of pushback. You said that there was a pushback on not doing autopsies. What did the scientific community, your own physician colleagues, say about what you were pointing out? What was their response?
To be honest with you, Dr. Kelly, from the Canadian physicians, there's been complete silence. They'll push back on me when they attack me on Twitter, for example, online. And they'll say this is disinformation and you're making this up. And I faced these attacks from the Canadian Medical Association. They've said this is absolutely, there's no evidence of this. And they don't even want to look at the data. I have a huge database of physician deaths spanning 4 years that I can hand over to the Canadian Medical Association. I've offered this data to them. Half of the data was from their own website before they deleted it. So the Canadian Medical Association actually had an in memoriam page where they kept track of physician deaths for many, many years. And they've recently deleted all of that information. So half of the data was from their own website, and they refused to look at it. The other half of the data was from other medical associations like the Royal College of Physicians or the provincial colleges who report deaths of physicians sometimes. So from the medical establishment, there's been complete denial. They don't want to look at any data about physician sudden deaths. From the physicians themselves, I'll get the occasional email saying, I am concerned, but for the most part, again, physicians are simply ignoring this. But I am getting acknowledgement from nurses, from pharmacists, paramedics, other frontline healthcare workers who are telling me, yes, this is happening, and you're absolutely right in bringing this forward.
That is so interesting because that is exactly what we are seeing in the United States. And my theory is this: it wasn't the nurses, the paramedics, or the pharmacists who ordered the vaccines for their patients. It was doctors. And I think the level of cognitive dissonance, the idea that they do not want to acknowledge, oh my God, not only did I take this, but I was out there foisting this, promoting this, and suggesting this to my patients. So I think they are terrified to even consider what you are saying and what you are pointing out. Furthermore, this issue about autopsy. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that not just on their patients, which is a terrifying thought. Imagine you've recommended this to all of your patients, but they've really recommended it to their children, to their families, to their extended families, to their friends. And so I often come across the situation where when I am contacted by family members of physicians who've died suddenly, they will tell me, they truly believed in the vaccine and they recommended it to all of their family members and they gave it to their kids. And I think that's where, the real tragedy may lie.
And this issue about autopsies, again, in the United States, we are not doing any appreciable autopsies either. But an autopsy by itself isn't enough. As you know, we've got to do the appropriate tissue sampling and staining. Dr. Ryan Cole, who's a friend and colleague and certainly a good friend of this program, has pointed out that we have the stains available, but you have to do them, and they aren't being done routinely. Those stains that would actually have shown in these cases of these sudden deaths that the physicians have globs of spike protein in their myocardium. There's evidence of myocarditis, and it's that inflammation of the heart that puts them at risk for a dysrhythmia, a fatal dysrhythmia, to occur either when they're exercising or in those early morning sleep hours. Move beyond, though. Now, you've also not just focused on those physician deaths. That's, I believe, where you started. But let's talk about one of the things that's most interesting to me, and I had predicted this long before we started seeing the data coming in, the increases in cancers. I've got some good theories. There's some good information for why that might be happening. But talk about your observations and your findings with regard to cancers following these vaccinations.
That's been a fascinating development. And again, for me, the pattern that I first noticed of increased cancers, and particularly aggressive cancers that seem to metastasize very rapidly. And again, I noticed it in the doctors, in the physicians. And what's interesting is when you look at the increased physician mortality and the sudden or unexpected deaths, they're actually skewed towards the younger doctors. So it's doctors in their 20s, 30s, and 40s that are actually seeing a far higher mortality rate than doctors in their 50s and 60s. And that's where these cancers show up in these young individuals. And these cancers are very unusual. They tend to present quite late, so usually at stage 3 or 4. And they tend to be very aggressive and almost resistant to conventional treatments, to conventional chemotherapy or radiation. And so that's where I first noticed this pattern of these cancers that, for example, I had a 27-year-old doctor in British Columbia, a medical student, who after 2 COVID-19 vaccine doses, about a month or two later, started developing back pain. And then he comes down with this very rare spinal cord cancer
Yeah.
that grows very rapidly. At first, doctors thought that they could treat it and it was, treatable and he could be, put in remission. But it just progressed too rapidly. They operated and they realized on the pathology results that they could not offer him any treatments, and he was dead within a matter of months. And you start seeing these cancers all over the place.
Yeah.
The obituaries are now full of them.
Yeah, we are seeing in the United States a lot of very unusual cancers in young people, aggressive lymphomas, leukemias, and interestingly, colon cancers in people in their 20s and 30s. I mean, there's a reason we don't normally start doing screening colonoscopies until age 50, 40 or 40 at the youngest if you have a strong family history, but never in the 20s and 30s. All of a sudden, we're seeing aggressive colon cancers, testicular cancers in young, healthy people. One of the theories about that, by the way, is that we very clearly can show a shift in immunoglobulins following vaccine, and there's a shift specifically to IgG, that specific immunoglobulin, and more importantly, the subset of IgG, IgG4, which is responsible for telling your body to ignore that something is foreign. I mean, obviously, it doesn't behoove anybody to react to every single thing. We'd all be just walking around with a box of Kleenex taped to our arm with allergies to everything if you reacted to every bit of pollen, every bit of dust, every bit of cat hair, or whatever. So IgG4 is the part of your body that tells you, don't pay attention to this. It's foreign, but ignore it. If there's a huge shift and huge increases in IgG4, you also start ignoring things like that abnormal colon cell, that abnormal breast cell, that abnormal, neuron cell that your immune system would otherwise just wipe out, go away, and it would never become a cancer. But if you have a huge increase in that, I think your body is now being told to ignore things that are abnormal. Outside of the physician population that you've been focusing on, have you been looking at cancer rates elsewhere in the general population in Canada?
Again, I've noticed this in young individuals, and I get sent these stories every day in my mailbox. And you'd mentioned colon cancer, for example, and I get a lot of even breast cancers. Breast cancers in younger and younger women, breast cancers that start off as a little lump, and then within a month or two, they will grow to 10 centimeters size, and replacing the entire breast. Now you need to do a radical mastectomy. You need to do very aggressive chemotherapy. And I have parents coming to me and saying, "What do I do about this? This is something that even the oncologists have not seen before, and they don't know what to do with these cancers." So breast cancers, I've seen even gastric cancers behave very strangely, testicular cancers, especially in athletes. In the German Bundesliga, there's soccer players that are, there's a dozen soccer players that have come down with testicular cancers, all of them in their 20s and 30s. This is a very frightening situation. And the idea of the immunoglobulin shift is very fascinating because with the shift to IgG4, where you get sort of tolerance of your immune system to these external toxins, you actually get less of IgG1 and IgG3, which are involved in fighting viruses, and they're also involved in fighting cancer as well. So you're actually getting even less. You're getting a reduction in that protection that your immune system has. Against cancerous cells. And it seems that, some people lose their immune system protection entirely, and then these cancers can just explode and spread very, very rapidly.
Yeah,
Again, I'm going to ask
really
just Kelly very quickly back to my
Sure.
couple things as it pertains to that population. Once again, COVID plus vaccine, and any way to differentiate amongst those different categories. And then the fact that they're younger kind of tells you something interesting, but okay, I'll let you answer that. And shoot, my other question escaped me. It was about, gone. I'll come back with it in a second.
I think
Eh,
it would be very instructive to look at 2020,
mhm.
when we weren't seeing these cancers, and so you would think that if COVID was the issue, and again, this is where the good data is so important. But if COVID was the issue and we had several waves in 2020, we should have seen these cancers explode right
Correct.
as soon as COVID hit the
Yes.
shores, in the United States and Canada back in March of 2020. And now we're being told that really COVID was circulating even earlier.
Right.
It was probably circulating in 2019. Um, they're trying to sort of nail down when exactly it had come here. So we should have been seeing those kinds of aggressive uh, cancers, and I don't recall seeing them at the time, but I am seeing them now, especially in the last 6 to 12 months.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, and you're pointing out exactly what Ed Dowd has said, that we did not see this increase in disability, this increase in all-cause mortality in 2020. It didn't start until 2021, and that's when we saw the huge increase. So we should have seen it during, especially if it was COVID related, during those more significant Delta and the original Wuhan wave of the virus, and we didn't. Dr. Makis, you posted, I think it was earlier today or yesterday, perhaps, some pretty stunning cases and some thoughts about injuries in pregnant women and some things you were seeing in pregnancy. Talk about that.
I'd noticed some of these cases, really horrific cases of pregnant women coming down with massive heart attacks and strokes, usually later in pregnancy.
Mm.
And if they had been vaccinated, we actually had a surgeon here in Alberta in her 30s. She was pregnant. She was mandated to be COVID-19 vaccinated because she was just finishing surgical residency. And she came down, with a massive stroke. And I know that Dr. James Thorpe often talks about, the increase in
Sure.
miscarriages and stillbirths, and that's extremely important. But I've noticed that there's not a lot of focus placed on the health of the mother as well. And so when I've seen some of these really horrific cases of pregnant women, at let's say 32 weeks, 36 weeks, they're vaccinated and they're coming down with massive heart attacks, or strokes or brain bleeds. I've gone over the VAERS database, and there's a lot of such cases in VAERS of these incidents, again, following vaccination. Now, of course, you would have to establish the connection, more firmly, but
Right.
I am seeing that pattern there as well.
But as you point out before, you won't find what you won't look for. And what we are seeing certainly in the United States, and it sounds like in Canada as well, is if the powers that be, if the institutions that are mandated to be looking at these things, in our case, the CDC or the NIH or whoever it is, refuse to look at the data, if they refuse, they should be demanding autopsies with tissue sampling and tissue staining. They should be absolutely, the VAERS system is owned by Health and Human Services here. It's theirs to be looking at it. Instead, they're doing everything they can to silence those of us who actually are bringing the information forward. What is another thing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's my understanding that probably a year ago in Ottawa, the leading cause of death in the province of Ottawa was unknown cause.
So that was
Are you aware
actually
of that?
in yes, so that was in my province of Alberta.
Okay,
We
I'm
actually
sorry.
had several reports come out that the number one cause of death, it was cause unknown. We had 3,400 Albertans die due to unknown causes. It was the leading cause of death by far, much higher than cancer, dementia, the usual causes that you would expect. And Mark Stein actually picked this up as well in his, on his show. But that is the situation. And I wanted to mention because you have the VAERS system in the United States, and here in Canada, Health Canada is supposed to be tracking these injuries and deaths. And what happens is that I've been informed, again, by my physician colleagues who are submitting these injury reports. They are filling out the forms, they are submitting it, but they get stopped at the provincial level. So we have a health authority here, for example, Alberta Health Services, who will block those COVID vaccine injury and death reports submitted by physicians as they're legally obliged. They will actually stop those reports. They will not send them to Health Canada. They will send them back as rejected. And then they will focus on the doctor and say, well, you might have to have your license examined more closely. And that's what's happening in provinces in Canada. So when Health Canada says there have been 0 deaths attributed to the COVID-19 vaccines, well, it's because the reports are being blocked at the provincial level in every province.
Which is really terrifying. I mean, I've said from the beginning, the virus is real, the statistics are not. And I don't just mean the number of people who have COVID or died from COVID. I mean all of the data. It's all suspect. For exactly the reasons you point out, we are seeing this just egregious manipulation of the data in the United States, whether it's rejecting cases from VAERS or simply trying to silence physicians from reporting it at all. Do you have a sense in Canada, having all of that said, that we will never, in the United States at least, have good numbers around how many people are actually vaccinated for COVID? Do you have a sense or a way to get at, in Canada, what percentage of the population do you believe has had at least one vaccine for COVID, and what percentage is fully vaccinated?
That's a good question. In Canada, I believe the numbers are in the high 80s. So something like 86% of Canadians are being reported by the government to have had at least one vaccine. Maybe 84% have had 2 vaccines. It's hard for me to, get a sense of how accurate those numbers are. But at least from what I've seen in my circle and from my colleagues, the vast majority of people have taken, at least 2 doses. And there's been tremendous push. One thing that really frightens me is that the Canadian government is reporting that children 12 to 19 years old, 80% of them have had 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccines or more. 80%, that is a very large number. For children 5 to 11 years old, that number is 50% have had 2 doses or more. And so, I've been reporting on children, high school children and elementary school children dying suddenly or unexpectedly in the last few months. The numbers are staggering. I'm seeing a lot of high school athletes coming down with, sudden cardiac arrests, heart attacks, sudden deaths. Hockey players, we have a very, hockey is very popular in Canada. A lot of parents have put their kids in hockey, and they were mandated at least 2 shots to be able to continue playing hockey, to be able to access hockey arenas or sports facilities in general. So this is something that really, frightens me. And I really feel for these kids because I believe, their immune systems might have been damaged.
And I want to point out really quickly that we're not saying, I want to kind of soothe some of the parents' anxiety a little bit. And we're not saying that you're at massive risk if you've been vaccinated. What we're saying is COVID itself offers your children little or no risk. And we are worried that this vaccine has some significant risk, which in the sense of relative risk is potentially quite massive relatively, but not on an individual or a population basis. It's not like everyone should be anxious now. I don't want everyone that way. Can I flip back to pregnancy for a second and show you how frustrated I am with the data? This is both from Canada and the UK. 90% of all hospitalizations and 98% of critical care hospitalizations in pregnancy associated with COVID-19 were in unvaccinated patients. One data point. Another data point, in Ontario, data shows the 6-fold increase in risk of being admitted to the ICU due to COVID during pregnancy. And another one, 435 study meta-analysis, increased risk of ICU admission, ventilator, maternal death in those with COVID-19 during pregnancy. It doesn't say with or without vaccination. And then in this same group, I won't go through it, essentially the summary is vaccines are perfectly safe with zero serious side effects, zero. Neither of those sets of data pass the sniff test for anybody who's practicing medicine. And this is, Dr. Makis, when I was interviewing, the stuff that really troubles me. If I could find meaningful data, I could help people make decisions. But none of it matches clinical experience.
Well, we've had the same problem. Back in 2021, we had what was called the pandemic of the unvaccinated. And I remember that was, pushed in the United States, but it was pushed here in Canada as well. But if you looked at the data more closely, you would realize that, during the first 14 days after vaccination, everyone was labeled as unvaccinated.
Correct.
And
Right.
yet the vast majority of the deaths that occur post-vaccination occur in the first 14 days, and all of those people
Right.
were labeled as unvaccinated. And so,
Right.
when you looked closely at this so-called pandemic of the unvaccinated, it just didn't pass the sniff test. You could tell that the data was heavily manipulated, and there really wasn't a pandemic of the unvaccinated as far as I was concerned.
No, but you just hit the nail on the head. This was sleight of hand. This was a shell game like no other. They simply didn't call these people vaccinated, Drew. They'd received the vaccines, but not, 14 days hadn't gone by, so they were still classified as, quote, unvaccinated. It's absolutely disingenuous. It was intellectually dishonest. Um, One of the things that's problematic with regard to getting the data is that people have a vested interest in lying both ways. There are people who will say that they were vaccinated when they weren't because they wanted to travel or they didn't want to risk their jobs or they wanted to attend sporting events or whatever. And God only knows how many false vaccine cards are out there floating around. But people also have a reason to be dishonest the other way. There are many people, I believe, who did get vaccinated who now feel foolish, feel that they were duped or that they didn't do their own due diligence and therefore feel that they didn't make a wise decision. So they'll say, oh, no, I didn't take that dang thing. So who really knows where the truth lies? In the United States, the CDC says 92% of the population has been vaccinated. I don't think there's any way that it's that high. I think we may well be in the high 70s. I don't know, but it certainly isn't 92%. How we ever find out those numbers, I think, I don't have a good answer. You posted something, I believe, also recently about pilots. And would love for you to talk a little bit about your thought about that, about injuries to pilots.
It's very interesting. I had done a Substack article on pilot incapacitations and sudden cardiac arrests in flight back in 2021 and 2022. And, I had found a number of them, about, let's say, 5 in 2022. And then I noticed these pilot incapacitations have started happening more and more frequently, especially in the month of March. We've had at least 7 pilot incapacitations on major commercial flights, just in a matter of 1 month. And, one of those pilots ended up passing away. It was a British Airways pilot who died actually just before a flight from Cairo to London. He had died in the hotel of the crew. And the other pilot incapacitations occurred. The planes were all landed safely, thank God. But you've had some close calls, and so this has been. And I don't understand why this is happening at such an increased frequency in the last couple of months. But I've been approached by pilots at all my speaking events I go to. There's always at least 1 or 2 pilots who approaches me, and they say, we are worried. A lot of pilots have suffered injuries from the COVID-19 vaccine, especially the vaccine mandates. For example,
With the
here
FA,
in Al- yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Well, I was just going to say, here in Alberta, we have an airline called WestJet that boasts a 95% vaccination rate of its employees, And so, we have a lot of pilots who were forced to take the COVID-19 vaccines. Many of them are now suffering with all kinds of side effects and injuries, cardiac injuries, and yet, they don't know what to do because the authorities don't seem to be paying any attention to their injuries.
Well, the FAA actually changed their guidelines, their cardiac guidelines for reading of EKGs, sort of just quietly, clandestinely changed the guidelines because otherwise they would have had to fail. Such a large portion of the pilots in this past year would not have passed their EKGs. So they loosened up the guidelines with regard to how to read them, basically, without getting into the weeds on EKG reading. The intervals, the time intervals, they actually eased these guidelines so as not to have to eliminate certain numbers of pilots. One of those planes you're talking about that just happened in the past month or so, if I recall, the pilot was incapacitated and the plane was landed, but it was landed by a passenger, right, who happened to be a pilot from a different airlines, correct?
That's right. It was Southwest Air, and the pilot had collapsed mid-flight, and there was a non-Southwest pilot in the back who was actually, just happened to be on the flight going to another destination, and he came in and took over and landed the plane. So, these are very frightening situations, and I think especially at the frequency that it's happening right now. I've posted on my Substack that I'm truly concerned that if nothing is done, that we may see a major airline disaster as a result of one or more incapacitations of the crew, and
So
I just pray
so
it
now,
doesn't happen.
yeah, yeah. So now we've gone from the flight attendant coming on and saying, "Is there a doctor on board?" to coming on and saying, "Is there a pilot on board?" I mean, you're hoping to hell there happens to be a pilot in row 14 who can step up to the plate and fly the damn plane and land it. I mean, that's terrifying to me. And we interviewed Dr. Teresa Long, Lieutenant Colonel Long, about her experience in the Army, and she talked about the number of pilots that she had to ground because of evidence of myocarditis, pericarditis, or other injury that she clearly believes is related to the vaccines. And that's in the military. So the impact on our military and how much we have undermined, at least in the United States, the health and readiness of our military, because they, at least in this country, were mandated to be vaccinated. And I'm guessing in Canada, probably the same. Is that were healthcare workers and the military, I assume, mandated there?
That's correct. The Canadian Armed Forces were mandating COVID-19 vaccines. I have actually a family member in the Canadian Armed Forces who had to get vaccinated. What was shocking for me was that there were military cadets that had to be vaccinated as well. These are young boys who, they take summer programs with the Canadian Armed Forces. And we had two such boys, two such cadets who had died suddenly in just a month ago in February. They were both 18 years old. They were both mandated to take COVID-19 vaccines to be able to participate in these summer programs. And they both died suddenly at the age of 18. And I know that there's been cadets in the United States as well that have died suddenly. And so this is a very tragic. I wanted to also briefly mention that this is not happening with only the pilots. I've noticed I've done another Substack on buses and drivers being incapacitated while they're driving. And so, for example, there have been in the past month there have been 4 school buses where the driver had become incapacitated, where the bus lost control. Now, it was either a student that took control of the bus or a teacher that took control of the bus, to save the rest of the students in that bus. And, one of the drivers had actually died in front of the school, sitting in the bus, waiting for, the students. So this is happening as well, with bus drivers. And these are very tragic situations that, people should be aware that this is happening, and this is happening at an increasing frequency.
Oh, I sense that this, like as for me, I sense that this has become a bit of a mission for you, at least more recently. How, if at all, has this impacted your personal practice? You're a radiation oncologist, I understand. And has this impacted your practice? Are you continuing to see patients?
Well, Dr. Victory, I can tell you, if I still had my medical license, I would probably be not speaking about this at all. Actually, I had a large cancer program that was sabotaged by the federal government, by the Justin Trudeau Liberal government, about 6 years ago, and I've been involved in a legal battle as a result of the shutdown of my cancer program. And so when the pandemic hit, I was actually semi-retired. My medical license had been sabotaged, my hospital privileges as well, and so I can actually speak out about COVID vaccine issues, injuries, and deaths without any fear of being retaliated against, and let's say losing my job or losing my license. Because right now, all across Canada, any physician who is speaking up about these issues, about concerns about COVID-19 vaccines, is being silenced, is being dragged through legal proceedings. They're having their medical licenses stripped from them. They're having their hospital privileges stripped, and they are being silenced all across Canada. And I know it's happening in the United States as well. I know they've come after Dr. Peter
Yeah.
McCullough and his medical license. They may have come after Dr. Ryan Cole as well. I know there's a group coming after Dr. Asim Malhotra right now. So all physicians who are speaking up are being attacked and are being persecuted.
Now, let me though,
Yeah, I have
because I
defended.
have to ask
I've
these
defended.
questions. Hang a second, Kelly. I feel like somebody's got to ask this. What would you say to someone who said, "Well, you've been through this horrible experience with the tribunal. This is your way to. This is out of your frustration and your resentment. You're getting back at them." What would you say to someone suggesting that was your motivation?
Well, it's not a motivation at all, because the colleges of physicians and surgeons throughout Canada are almost above the law. There's no oversight from the government or the courts, and so they're acting of their own accord. I'm bringing this to people's attention. I'm doing it for my family. I'm doing it for my children. I'm doing it for other people's children, because I'm seeing people being harmed. I'm seeing people being hurt. And as a physician, I feel it's my duty and my responsibility, when I see something wrong that's being done in the medical field, to speak up about it. That's part of my Hippocratic oath. That's part of my medical ethics that I believe in, and so that's why I'm speaking up.
Well, I appreciate your courage, and I will tell you, I'm sorry to hear that you are no stranger to the tyranny that the medical boards can unleash. I agree with you. They have powers that cannot be explained. In the United States, the Federation of State Medical Boards, that unwields unbelievable control over physicians, is a private entity with zero accountability. You're hard pressed to even find an address or telephone number, let alone who actually runs the thing. I have defended myself against 7 separate complaints against my license over these past 3 years. And it's debilitating. It's exhausting. I've been successful each time, but it is exhausting emotionally and financially to do it. So I give you a lot of credit. I think you really have to ask, what is the motivation of the people like you or me who are speaking out about these things? I gain nothing financially. Unlike an Anthony Fauci or a Rochelle Walensky or an mainstream media or people who make vaccines, I stand to gain nothing. I stand to get nothing but actually, backlash. So you really have to. I would say to people, you might want to question, if you're going to question people's motivation, the motivation is for the people who have, brought to you by Pfizer, emblazoned, behind their head while they're talking, or the people who are making money on patents or vaccines or on different therapeutics. We've got a few minutes left here. So tell me where you see this going, not only in Canada, but do you have thoughts about how this is going to unwind, where it's leading?
I've been hopeful that, because especially in Canada, the demand for booster shots has crashed, has collapsed, and only 22% of Canadians are still up to date on their booster shots, have taken a booster shot in the last 6 months. So given that the vast majority of the population, 78% of Canadians, are no longer taking booster shots, I was hopeful that these sudden deaths, that these aggressive cancers, and that these horrific injuries, the heart attacks, strokes, neurological injuries, that they would decrease over time. And unfortunately, that's not what I'm seeing. If anything, I'm seeing an acceleration over the last 6 months or so. So now I'm starting to think that this may be sort of the longer term effects that we are seeing, with people who took their shot maybe a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, they took their last shots. And now we're seeing longer term effects, side effects of these vaccines. So I continue to hope and pray that that these incidents start decreasing and that we see less of it. But so far, my experience is that these incidents are on the rise and that they continue to rise. And I don't know how long this will continue for.
Well, one of the problems and one of my concerns when these vaccines were rolled out was precisely this. Normally, mRNA is very fragile on its own. And so if you use normal mRNA, it will degrade over a matter of days. It is so fragile, however, that the vaccine manufacturers created a synthetic mRNA so that it wouldn't degrade quickly. And as a result, we now have mRNA that is telling your body to create these toxic spike proteins in perpetuity. We have no idea when it will turn off. There is no off switch, which is part of the reason I think that looking at things like nattokinase, something that can in fact attack or help to address that toxic spike protein that's continuing to be produced, that can break it apart into smaller, perhaps less toxic subparticles. I think that's really where we as a profession need to be focusing. How do we help all of these people? Is it your sense in Canada that people are looking for fixes, for how to unscrew this up? The Dr. Kelly's colloquial "unfuck it bucket." How do we unfuck this? How do we undo this for people? Because although I would love to do a vindication, victory lap saying "I told you so," as a physician, I feel obligated to focus on how do we help all of these people.
Yes, absolutely. Whenever I do speeches, public speeches right now, I always have people coming to me afterwards asking for treatment advice. How do they get rid of the spike? How do they treat a whole manner of vaccine injuries? And nattokinase is one of those tools that I give them. I've been impressed, not just that it breaks down the spike protein, but that it has the ability to break down blood clots and amyloid blood clots,
Yes.
those strange blood clots that we've seen in the Die Suddenly
Right.
movie, those rubbery white clots that the embalmers are struggling with right now, and it seems to have the ability to break those down as well. I mentioned things like quercetin, things like NAC, N-acetylcysteine, olive leaf, dandelion leaf and root, white pine needle tea. There are a number of agents that block the spike protein and either change the conformation of the protein so that it's not as toxic, or prevent it from creating free radicals and doing damage to
Yeah.
tissues. And so I think people absolutely want this information. They are hungry for information. They want to know, what they can do about this spike protein that, as you mentioned, we don't know how to clear it from the body yet. But we can certainly take steps to mitigate some of the damage that it does in the body.
Yeah.
Guys, I think we are sort of rolling to a halt here.
Okay.
And Kelly, I want to keep you behind to answer a couple of calls if you don't mind. But Dr.
Sure.
Makis, you want to give us your particulars, where you send people, your Substack, your Twitter handle?
Yes, thank you. My Twitter account is at MakisMD, MAKISMD, and my Substack is makismd.substack.com. So I encourage people can sign up, for a free subscription, or if they want to pay $5 a month, I always appreciate the support.
Dr. Makis,
Well,
thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate your courage and your willingness to speak out. Good luck in all of your fights against the tyrannical government up there north of our border. We wish you the best of luck, and I'll circle back with you. We'll keep in touch and continue to watch this data. We appreciate having you in the fight with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Makis. So, Kelly, we've got a few calls. Some hands are up. For those of you that are on the Twitter Spaces, you just push you'll watch Caleb's little cartoon here in a second. You push the request button, and I'll see it as requested, and it'll bring you up. And if you come up to talk, you'll be speaking to Dr. Victory and myself, and streaming out on multiple platforms simultaneously with that. And this is not a Russian spy. That's the actual Twitter handle. So
Good.
We'll
Darn it.
We were hoping to speak to a Russian spy, but damn. You got to unmute yourself. Not a Russian spy. And we'll keep going here as the requests come through. You're still muted. And we're hooked up, but the mute continues. It's that lower left-hand corner mic. There you are. What's going on?
Hey, Dr. Drew, I really appreciate your show. You've had some really fantastic people on lately.
It's been interesting. Thank you.
I'm calling because having listened to the Sasha Lipiota episode recently and having some experience in the medicinal chemistry, the things that she said concerned me greatly, not only from the angle of the mRNA variability, but also from sort of the chemistry process involved in the self-assembly of the lipid nanoparticles. The self-assembly is almost certainly dependent on the nature of the mRNA to assemble properly. Not only that, things like, proper mixing, proper scaling. All right, take.
Yeah, you're essentially scrolling through all the stuff we keep hearing about, which is the mixing and the vat size and the construction of the lipid nanoparticles and the mRNA construction.
Right.
And the protein particles that seem to be circulating, the mRNA particles that seem to circulate. So these things keep coming up, and I have no expertise in this, but I've certainly heard this concern.
Well, yeah, and so one of the things that can happen.
I'm gonna interrupt you. I'm gonna interrupt you one more time. Although you're not a Russian spy, I'm fearful that a Russian or Chinese spy has interfered with your transmission.
Yes,
we couldn't hear you. You went into complete broken. Sort of.
What's interesting, Drew, is that if you were making Skittles, every 1 millionth bag of Skittles, I'm making this up, gets opened and they count it up, and if, for God forbid, there was 20% green ones or 30% green ones, and it wasn't mixed properly, they would shut down that assembly line and figure out what is it about the mixture of Skittles that's not getting it mixed homogenously. Okay, but fast forward to these vaccines, there's zero quality control. Those vaccine vials came in multi-use vials. It wasn't just, here's the vial, you draw the entire amount into the syringe. Many of those vials were meant to fill 50 or more syringes. So the first two or three, and you may recall during the early days of the vaccine rollout, people weren't getting these largely at their doctor's office. They were rolling up their sleeve in the parking lot at some stadium,
Yeah.
or something like that. So you've got people rapidly giving them. The first 3 may have had 100% of the mRNA from the entire vial in it, and the next 40 syringefuls may have had largely lipid nanoparticles or other stuff. We don't know.
Yeah.
The quality,
This is
the
what
quality control was zero.
Right. Sasha Latipova was bringing that to our attention, but
Yeah.
not a Russian spy is bringing up these other elements too that keep coming up. The experts
Right.
keep bringing up the biotechnologists. So hopefully, do we have you back?
Yes,
There you
yes,
are.
yes.
Go ahead.
What I was saying is that
We have a Russian spy. We have a Chinese and a Russian spy. You may not be a Russian spy, but somebody else is. I'm going to have to put you back in the
No,
audience.
it's a ghost.
I would say you would do us a great good service if you could send what your comment is in sort of brief format to contact Dr. Drew.
component in order to get, say, specific lung or liver delivery. So the fact that the mRNA is being manufactured improperly probably means the lipid nanoparticle is improper. If the lipid nanoparticle is improper, it will probably deliver variably to possibly different tissues. It will also probably affect toxicity and immunogenicity, because one of the things that vary immunogenicity is the amount of PEG included in the lipid nanoparticle. So like you were saying, and like Kelly, and also thank you very much, Kelly, you are so awesome. One of the, none of this would have been acceptable at all. Even any single one of these components have never been acceptable.
That's right.
You get big time trouble from the FDA from having wrong crystal isoforms.
Yes.
You don't just get to make something completely different from what you're claiming to make and then put it into people.
And let's not forget, there were FDA officials resigned over these very issues.
Yeah.
And I've said repeatedly, we get they were in an emergency, they were rushing to market. I get it. Alpha and Delta was worse. They may have helped obviate that. They may have hurt some people along the way. Could have happened. Why not? Why push so hard now then? Why continue to push so hard is really the craziness of all this, right, Kelly?
Absolutely. I would be hard pressed to come up with any reason for somebody to get vaccinated today, Drew. These vaccines do not work against the current strains that are out there. We have treatments available, and the current strains are very, very mild. We have a tsunami of adverse events that have been reported, and I think it is way past time to pull these off the market and to really do the diligent deep dive analysis of what we should have done from the very beginning. Pull them off the market.
Carl Clift. Carl, you're muted, so unmute yourself. We'll talk to you. There you are.
Hi, Drew. How are you?
Good. What's happening?
Very good. Thank you. Just a couple of quick points. One, a couple of speakers. Your speakers are excellent. Some of the ones that I would look at, if you have a chance, would be, I'm assuming you've heard of Geert Vanden Bossche out of Belgium.
Yes.
Kelly,
did we talk about that speaker at one point?
Yeah, Geert does not, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he doesn't make appearances on shows like these. But I follow him very closely, and I agree with your thoughts, Carl. He's quite brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I've just received his book. I actually bought a couple of copies. Just came today, actually. So, and then also Dr. Phil McMillan. He's actually out of Jamaica, or is Jamaican, but in the U.S. Superb. And also a YouTube channel called Merigenomics. So that's just a comment. You can look at those up.
What was the last one again? Wait. Tell me that one again.
Yeah, the YouTube channel called Merigenomics.
Merigenomics.
Dr. Mikhail. He's actually out of Alberta, Canada. Very, very good from a science point of view. But just a real quick note. What I'm finding difficult to sort of stand is a lot of people saying that we didn't know. We had to move fast. We were unaware. All of these things are saying that we had to do certain things that we wouldn't normally do. My story is very simple. In March, I was in Australia when this all occurred. I'm in Canada. I was down at a wedding. And my daughter, who's a nurse here, said, I'm working the COVID ward. Freaked me out. Absolutely freaked me out. And the government of Canada started calling me to say, you got to get on a plane, you got to get home, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I need to do something. So I started researching. Now, I'm talking March of 2020. And I found John Ioannidis, and I found his stats on the Ruby Princess, on Wuhan, on Italy. And I'm like, well, this is a bad flu. And he had metadata analysis even then. So I went down the rabbit hole. And long story short, 3 years later, I've been down the rabbit hole for 3 years. But it's not true. The data was there. And if people took the time, spent a few minutes, and looked, they could have found it. I have I've got education, but no medical education.
Carl, that's sort of what we're doing here, is trying to figure out what happened, because there was a lot we agreed should not have gone the way it did. It's so confusing the way it went. Now, I will push back a little bit on what you said. I had Alpha or Delta. It's bad, and now H1N1 is just about as bad, frankly. And no one even knew that one hit. I certainly knew that I had it, but it's worse than a bad flu. But you're right, though. The way we reacted was uncanny given what was happening. And we're trying to figure out why. And we're putting little pieces of that puzzle together, sort of one step at a time. Kelly?
That I agree with exactly what you're saying, Carl. I've said from the beginning that I didn't push back on everything from the fact that most of us were not at significant risks to the fallacy of masks, social distancing, lockdowns, the vaccines. I didn't say what I was saying because I'm a good guesser. I didn't have a crystal ball. I said what I was saying because the data was out there. We've known for decades that none of these mitigation schemes would work. And we had, as you rightly point out, we had the data early on about who was actually at risk from this virus. We knew that children, healthy young people under the age of 30, were at such a de minimis risk from this virus as to be fundamentally indistinguishable from zero. But they didn't act that way.
Yep.
And so I would say they didn't make a mistake. I say they lied.
Well, and they panicked, and they made terrible assumptions, and they went out of their way to harm people who raised their hand and said, hey, are we really doing the right thing here? And they now want us to turn the page and turn the other cheek. And at very minimum, anyone who is engaged in that behavior should never be listened to or trusted again. Period. Unless they apologize and explain what happened. We should not be subjected to this nonsense. It has to change, and the only way it's going to change is either everyone examines themselves, apologizes, adjusts course, explains what happened, or we simply do not listen to these people ever again.
I agree, Drew. You can't be at the helm of a crisis. You cannot be a leader if you refuse to be circumspect in any way. If you refuse to be able to look back, analyze your own decision making, and be thoughtful about it, and be willing to say, wow, okay, here's why we did what we did. Here's why we thought it was the right thing. And here's why it was wrong. Anybody can respect that. People make errors. There are errors of judgment. There are errors in how you interpret data. CEOs do it all the time. But a good leader is the one who can look at his or her decisions and choices and then be very forthright about it through the retrospectoscope and say, okay, I made the wrong choice, and I'm sorry for the people I harmed. Instead, to this day, the element of hubris that people like Anthony Fauci and Rochelle Walensky and Deborah Birx, all these people, they just double down and say, no, we were right. Look how great we were, as if they have absolutely no ability to see the pain and suffering that their decisions caused.
In a weird way, that is a little bit scarier, I have to say. But above and beyond the leaders, there's also a group in here that is duplicitous, and that is so-called journalists. And the fact that they don't analyze, at least, I don't even care if they frankly say that they were wrong. They were following the data that was being sent to them that was distorted. Maybe they don't know better. Journalists, let's be fair, most of them are trained in nothing other than journalism. So how do they know? But I'd at least like to see some journalism done now where they put a microscope on the people who told them the things to say the things that turned out to be excessive. Short of that, I am disgusted, particularly by them. We'll have to wrap this up. Kelly, thank you so much today, as always. Thank you for the callers. Thank you for the chat streams.
Lots of shout outs for Kelly today on Rumble and YouTube, by the way.
That's good. Well,
thank you.
Keep them coming. We appreciate it. And Kelly has certainly had to defend herself repeatedly to be here with us and to share with you her thoughts. And so I'm glad you're appreciated. All right, Kelly, we will see you on, well, we're going to speak to a presidential candidate coming up, right?
Yes.
On April 10th?
Yes, but we are not discussing that part of his visit. He's here to discuss with us issues surrounding. Yes, we are not.
That kills me.
Is that common knowledge, or did we just have a spoiler?
No, he announced today.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, Drew, I told you.
Caleb?
we're not talking about that part. That's not what the interview is about.
No, I know, but he announced today. He announced today.
Did.
I understand.
Yes, no.
He announced
today.
He
announced and he announced it. I'm very excited about that. But we are discussing, just so that for our listeners, I don't want you to think you're going to hear get a sort of a preview into the politics. He, for good reasons, cannot mix his discussions about things related to the Children's Health Defense, which is a nonprofit, and his run for the presidency. So we are going to respect that and stick to issues around vaccines and fraud and all the things that he's uncovered during this last pandemic. And then we've got Asim Mehrotra coming back the 25th, and I'm really excited about that. He has gone from, as you know, a vaccine zealot to a real warrior to expose the dangers of these. So here's a guy who said, I made a mistake. I was pushing these. I believed in it. I thought it was the right thing. And it turns out that now I'm following the actual data. And he did a 180. And I think he's really a terrific spokesperson for that reason.
I hadn't realized that he had announced. I hadn't realized that Kennedy had announced that today, and so I was afraid I was going to have to go and edit 5 different platform videos and bleep things out and do my 7-second delay.
I get. He, you know what caught my attention? He put out a really interesting tweet yesterday, not laying out his foreign policy position, but raising some really interesting. I actually took a picture of my phone and thought, wow, that's a guy I could vote for. Oh, good, we're going to talk to him, and then he announced for president.
Yep. And then also somebody that's not on the list on April 11th is Naomi Wolf.
Oh yeah, she's coming back.
She's coming back.
Okay.
I think it's the 11th. No, actually, wait, this isn't right.
She's coming back at sometime soon. We'll figure out the date.
It's the Tuesday.
Tomorrow.
But it's Emily, help me.
We'll figure it out. Don't worry, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow at 3:00
Sorry about that.
Jimmy Dore.
Might be the 17th.
Terrific.
Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.
This seems like just the worst opening line I think I've ever seen in my life. As the kids would say, negative riz. Negative riz.
Cap.
Yeah.
Did I use that right?